In 218 BC, one of the boldest military gambles in history began far from the walls of Rome. A Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca prepared to challenge the power of Rome itself. Instead of sailing toward Italy, Hannibal chose a far more dangerous and unexpected path. He planned to march his entire army across the towering and frozen mountains of the Alps. No general had ever attempted to move war elephants through such brutal terrain before. Rome believed the Alps were an impenetrable barrier protecting northern Italy. Hannibal intended to prove that even the greatest natural defenses could be broken. His army began the long march from Iberia with tens of thousands of experienced soldiers. Veteran infantry marched alongside cavalry units, hardened by years of brutal warfare. Behind them followed supply trains, engineers, and dozens of massive war elephants. The journey ahead would stretch across rivers, forests, hostile tribes, and mountains. Before they could face Rome, they would first have to survive the march itself. Soon, the towering Alps rose before them like a frozen wall across the horizon. Jagged peaks cut through the clouds as snow covered the deadly mountain slopes. Narrow paths twisted along cliffs where a single misstep could mean death below. Cold winds tore through armor and clothing as the army climbed higher each day. Food grew scarce while the air became thin and the nights brutally cold. Soldiers struggled to move supplies along steep icy paths carved into the rock. Even the massive war elephants slipped and stumbled along the frozen passes. Still, Hannibal pushed his exhausted army deeper into the mountains. As Hannibal's army climbed deeper into the Alps, the true danger of the journey became clear. Steep cliffs towered above the narrow paths, while icy winds cut through armor and skin. Snow covered the trails, hiding deadly drops that plunged into darkness below. The soldiers moved slowly, step by step, along paths barely wide enough for a single man. Massive war elephants struggled to keep their footing on the frozen mountain ground. When one animal slipped, entire sections of the path collapsed into the valley below. Supplies were lost as wagons tumbled down cliffs and vanished into the mist. But the mountains were not the only threat waiting for Hannibal's army. Hostile mountain tribes watched the invaders from hidden positions along the ridges. When the army reached the most dangerous passes, the tribes launched sudden attacks. Rocks and spears rained down on the soldiers struggling along the narrow paths. Chaos erupted as men tried to defend themselves without falling from the cliffs. Hannibal ordered his troops to push forward and drive the attackers from the heights. Brutal fighting broke out along the frozen slopes and jagged mountain ridges. Many soldiers fell during the battles, disappearing into the deep valleys below. Still, the army continued forward through snowstorms and freezing winds. Food ran dangerously low as the march stretched on for weeks. The men began to wonder if any army could survive such a journey. But Hannibal refused to turn back from the mountains. Ahead of them, the path into Italy slowly began to appear. The higher Hannibal's army climbed, the more dangerous the mountain passes became. Snowstorms swept across the peaks, burying the narrow paths beneath deep, drifting snow. Many soldiers slipped on the icy slopes and vanished into the ravines below. The war elephants struggled through the freezing wind, their breath steaming in the air. Epic historical realism, Hannibal commanding his army during the Alpine crossing. Engineers worked desperately to carve paths through rock and frozen ground. At times, the army had to rebuild entire sections of the trail along the cliffs. One collapse sent hundreds of soldiers sliding down a slope of ice and stone. Hannibal himself rode among the men, urging them forward despite the terrible losses. He reminded them that beyond the mountains lay the rich lands of northern Italy. The promise of victory kept the army moving through the frozen wilderness. After days of climbing, they finally reached one of the highest passes in the Alps. From the summit, the soldiers could see endless mountains stretching behind them. Many realized they had crossed a barrier no army had ever conquered before. But the most dangerous part of the journey was still ahead of them. The descent into Italy would prove just as deadly as the climb. Steep, frozen slopes forced the army to move with extreme caution. War elephants slid along icy paths as soldiers tried to guide them downward. One wrong step could still send entire groups plunging into the abyss. Yet beyond the mountains, the plains of Italy slowly came into view. After weeks of suffering in the mountains, Hannibal's army finally descended into Italy. The surviving soldiers stepped onto the green plains of northern Italy, exhausted but alive. Behind them lay the frozen peaks that had nearly destroyed the entire army. Thousands had died during the brutal crossing of the Alps. Many more had been lost to avalanches, starvation, and attacks from mountain tribes. Even several of the mighty war elephants had fallen along the deadly paths. But the army that emerged from the mountains was hardened by the journey. They had survived one of the most dangerous marches in military history. News of Hannibal's arrival spread quickly across northern Italy. Roman commanders had believed the Alps would stop any invasion. Instead, an enemy army had appeared where Rome least expected it. The Roman Republic now faced a threat inside its own territory. Hannibal wasted no time preparing his army for the battles ahead. Local tribes who hated Roman rule began to join his forces. With fresh allies and battle-hardened soldiers, Hannibal advanced south. Roman armies marched north to stop the Carthaginian general. Soon the two great powers of the ancient world would collide. The march across the Alps had only been the beginning. Hannibal had brought war directly to Rome's doorstep, and the battles that followed would shake the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic quickly realized the danger Hannibal now posed in northern Italy. Few Roman leaders had believed such an invasion was even possible. Yet Hannibal had done what many considered impossible. He had marched a foreign army and war elephants across the Alps. The psychological shock alone sent fear through the Roman Senate. Roman armies rushed north to confront the Carthaginian invaders. But Hannibal had chosen his battlefield carefully. He used the terrain and surprise to defeat Roman forces again and again. At battles like Trebia and Lake Trasimene, Roman armies suffered devastating losses. Thousands of Roman soldiers fell as Hannibal's tactics outmatched them. Rome had faced powerful enemies before, but none like Hannibal. He had brought war directly into the heart of Roman territory. For years, Roman generals struggled to defeat the brilliant Carthaginian commander. The crossing of the Alps became one of the most daring feats in military history. It proved that even the greatest natural barriers could be overcome. Hannibal's march changed the course of the Second Punic War forever. Generals for centuries would study the strategy behind the crossing. Even today, the journey remains a symbol of bold leadership and determination. Against all odds, Hannibal had turned the impossible into reality, and his march across the Alps would echo through history. More than 2,000 years later, Hannibal's march across the Alps still astonishes historians. Few commanders in history have attempted anything so dangerous or so bold. He crossed frozen mountains that many believed no army could survive. With soldiers, cavalry, and even war elephants, he brought war to Rome itself. The journey became one of the most legendary military feats in history. It proved that determination and daring could overcome even nature's greatest barriers. And it ensured that the name Hannibal would never be forgotten. If you enjoy exploring history beyond the myths, consider subscribing for more documentaries like this. And as always, thank you for watching.